Hey, this is Aaron Bethune with We Write Stories, and if you really want to learn how to level up your life, you should be listening to the Time to Shine Today podcast with my great friend Scott Ferguson. Let's level up.
Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. This is Scott Ferguson. We're at episode 313. It's actually the area code that I grew up in back in the day in Detroit, Michigan, but lucky number for me. But we're going to talk to my really good friend who is a world traveler, worked with musicians, are involved in the Grammys. Just an absolutely phenomenal human being, Aaron Bethune. And he is the CEO and founder of the company We Write Stories. And they were going to help you get your story out there. Everybody has a story inside them. A lot of people want to tell it, they just don't know how. So from soup to nuts, that's what Aaron's company does. And I'm not going to explain too much more now, but if you have a digital note taker or just a regular pen and pad and you're looking to get your story out there, make sure you break it out. Because here comes my really good friend, Aaron Bethune from We Write Stories. Let's level up. Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. This is Scott Ferguson. I got my boy, musician, rock star, just a kick-ass individual, man, who I was blessed to be introduced to through actually, who did Ryan Stanley?
Ryan Stanley,
yeah,
our mutual friend.
Absolutely. And I believe he does the T-shirts, the concert T-shirts, if I'm not mistaken.
He does the concert T-shirts. Yeah. He's got a fantastic social media network now. Yeah.
Right. And squad, we got Aaron Bethune here. And Aaron is an adventurer from climbing in the Andes and making records to speaking around the world and working with celebrities, musicians, entrepreneurs, charities, government, and corporations. Aaron is always excited to see life through a new lens, which he works well with our squad here at Time to Shine Today. He's got the company Rewrite Stories, which we'll dig into a little bit as well in our discussion. But Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. Please introduce yourself to the Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. But first, what's your favorite color and why?
Whoa, favorite color. Okay. It's changed over time, but I would say it's orange. And if I don't say it's orange, my family would tell you it's orange.
Why orange?
You know what? I didn't know to begin with, but I'm really into, graphic design and colors. And looking into it, I found out that orange is a color that represents creativity.
Yeah.
And supposedly, if you look at the color orange, it actually gives you more oxygen.
Oh, wow.
Who knew?
I have to remember
So if you're out of breath, look at some orange colors in your.
So that's why they have this huge chain of workout places called Orange Theory.
Yeah, you know what?
In there. I love it.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a tie-in.
And you are, it's in your color wheel too, man. So you could rock some orange as well. So that's awesome. Not much really rhymes with orange, if anything. Being a musician, Well, Eminem made it happen, but people might not. But man, let's get to the roots, man. Like the story of where you've lived a journeyed life, man. And I have too. But so there's some parts that I vicariously lived through you with jamming on stage and meeting the people that you've met and awesome. But let's get to the roots, brother, and how you got started.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. Well, I think the music side of me started when I was 4 years old and started playing the piano, decided that wasn't for me at 7. At 7, I started playing the guitar. From that moment on, I realized that there was going to be nothing else in my life that wasn't going to include music in some form. And I went to school for music, started my first music company while in university, realizing that I didn't want to be like everyone else who was going to leave school and then work at the bank or something like that. So I started a music company. While I was in school, I actually booked Sly and the Family Stone's first tour of Japan. And the funny thing about that is that I didn't understand how to make money from it. So I was able to get myself in the position to make it happen, but not make money from it. In retrospect, I could have paid for my schooling just with the gigs that I booked in.
Wow.
But I essentially was, intending to be a musician myself as a living, and realized if you don't have the business, then you can't turn that into a career. I found myself getting interested in the business, getting good at doing the business. And fast forward a bunch of years, I ended up working in every element of the music industry. I wrote a book that's used at universities as a textbook for the music business. I went from living in a little village with 4 houses in the middle of nowhere in northern Spain in the mountains to, later on being involved with the Grammys and artists that you've definitely heard of, as well as helping develop people that you've never heard of. And through that process, I realized that no matter what role I played, I was always heavily involved in the personal development of people, because if they wanted to become a star and they weren't yet, it meant there had to be some sort of change, some sort of personal development that would go on in order for him to get to that place. So no matter what I did, I was always involved in helping people develop. And then I started to realize that the music industry is a very small bubble. You just need to know, a couple handfuls of people, and you're basically going to be networking with all the movers and shakers.
Right.
And meanwhile, the music itself affects people around the world outside of the music industry itself. And so I started to get involved with companies, organizations, sports, FIS World Ski Championships, ended up getting involved in working with the First Nations, so the indigenous, in Alaska and the Yukon to help protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Ended up creating the Music and Culture Ambassador role for the state of Mississippi, and basically started working with companies and brands to help them reach an audience, because one thing that music does extremely well is help people to, connect. If you don't have fans, you don't have a career. And meanwhile, in other industries, you can set a price point and compete on price point.
Yeah.
But with music, you have to have fans. So if you convert that same building of fans into outside of the music industry, then you can, create some incredible companies. So I started getting involved with companies, getting involved in advisory roles, working with tech companies. And in the process, I started to realize that there were some similarities that I was seeing in these founders to musicians. Musicians start off super passionate about what they do, support all around with family, saying, hey, come out and do your little dance in front of my friends. And then once people get serious about music, then those same people start going, well, maybe we want to get a real job. That's kind of a hobby. And all of a sudden, those people think, how am I going to make this my business?
Sure.
And they start to look at others, in which case they start copying them. And if you want to stand out, you can't really try and fit in. And so I realized that there was this drift away from people's passion in order to try and turn that into business. And the same thing was happening with founders. They'd start a company because it was a needed service or product that was going to be changing people's lives. And then as they grew and they had, boards of directors and had fiscal obligations, I saw these decisions being made from, instead of that place of passion, a place from, making fiscal decisions and obligations to the board. And all of a sudden I was seeing people that were potentially successful in many ways, but unhappy in others. And so having written a book, I went about writing another book, and I took time away from the music industry, and I found that it was a very transformative experience for me. I looked at the coaching world. I thought coaching is going to be the next yoga. People are going to start incorporating that into their monthly payments as a way to improve their life experience. I think the millennials especially see experience more important over ownership, and so having a guide, being a coach, to be something that would actually become standardized in people's monthly payments. But I saw that coaches didn't really have a product at the end of it. So I thought, well, do I start a coaching company, or is there something else? And I realized that the book is a framework to help people reflect, pause and reflect, and at the same time, an opportunity for us to create a product at the end of it while still having that opportunity to coach people during the process. So that's a bit of from playing piano to now helping people write books without putting pen to paper.
Yeah, thank you for keeping it interesting and whatnot. Did you find in when you're maybe working with people to help them level up, to be able to, like, I'm sure in the music industry, and again, I've been blessed to coach some high-level entertainers. What do you find that the best, how they handle rejection?
I think specifically in the arts, you're putting such a lot of your heart and soul out there that the pain of rejection can be so great that either A, people don't even try to put themselves out there, or B, they do, and when they get that first rejection, they're kind of done for. Mm-hmm. And I think that at the end of the day, when I've spoken at universities, I tell kids, I'm like, look, you're not going to not get better. You're here because you love music. No one has to tell you to practice. But if you don't work on yourself, then you're not going to be able to put that talent to the best use. And so my big thing has always been that rejection has, it's painful, but it's the greatest way to learn something. I mean, it's like in a business negotiation. If someone says no, now you know what they don't want, but you also know what they might want. And in some ways, having the ability to, whether it's pitch yourself to a record label or a publishing company or a management company or whatever that looks like, an agency, if they say no, it's so important to know why they say no. Sure. Because if you can learn what it is that's stopping them from saying yes, then it's actually an incredibly useful tool to make the next step even more productive. And so that's the thing. Don't curl up in a ball on the floor. Instead, get over that and move on to the next thing with the knowledge gained.
Love it, man. That is the best. Like, use that rejection and that pain as a way to learn from and to level up. That's fantastic, man. So tell me, do you work with people one-on-one, or are you more a group setting, or what's your story there, Aaron?
So when it comes to these books, we actually have it's a team effort. We've created these different, I guess, names for things, but essentially the first step is working with what we call a story explorer that essentially sits down with you, whether it's in person, over the phone, via Zoom. And what we do is we work together for about 2.5 months, just looking at your life story, first from the 30,000-foot view, and then we zoom in to the stories that naturally appear, because people always you tell them, like I just told you, tell me how you got to where you are. I just gave you some sample things. Yeah. And with that being said, those highlights and low points are stories that we then revisit in the, sort of that zoomed in next step. So we get those stories that get the context, then we zoom in further and we figure out what did you learn and how are those insights impacting your decisions today. And so that first process is one-on-one, although we have a team of people that between those conversations, we are getting together as a group to ensure that we're all processing the information, that we're knowing what the next steps are, that we're pulling out the outline and those kind of things. So it's a one-on-one process, but with a team behind it.
Love it. And so your team, the way it's mapped out, like what if someone comes in, they feel they have a story in them, right? And all of us do, but how does your team handle if someone comes and says, I'm just not interested?
What if someone comes to us and they're not, say it one more time.
They feel that they're not interesting.
Oh, they feel they're not interesting. Okay, well, yeah, that's unfortunately what a lot of people, I think, feel. Right. If we all thought we were interesting, on top of that, a great storyteller, our lives would be amazing in many ways. Right. So for us, that's kind of what we do. That's why we say we write your story for you, and without you putting pen to paper, because it actually, in my opinion, sometimes it takes having someone see your life from the outside. And it's like, I tell people, even outside of books, ask your friends what they think of you. Like, when they think of you, what do they think of? I mean, if you're in a situation where you're feeling you have nothing but bad luck and nothing ever happens for you, and you're telling that story to people who are then looking at you as someone who's always got bad luck and always feels like nothing happens for them, and that's being projected back to you to then reinforce what you already think of yourself, then at the end of the day, that cycle continues. And so it's really valuable to have someone listen to your story and to give you feedback on it, for you to then recognize your own story. Because one of the things that I think a lot of us, don't get enough of is positive comparisons. And I say positive comparisons, meaning it's not a matter of comparing yourself to people on social media or people that you think have a better life than you, but also comparison, which is the positive comparison I'm suggesting, is you still need to know where you're at. So for example, with musicians, a lot of musicians think that, they don't put a value to themselves because they think what they do is so easy and so enjoyable that how could they charge for that? Whereas they look at the person who's the investor with the money as having everything. Right. And at the end of the day, you have to recognize what you have. And I'm talking about music, but whatever that talent is, whatever that thing in your life is, you need to be able to understand its value. And it's very difficult sometimes to do that. And that's why in the music world, and I would say any industry, having someone that represents you is so important, because they can see that from the outside and they can put that value to your work. And so, when someone comes and says, I don't have a very interesting story, my thing would be, let's not say that. Let's dive in and let's find out what your story really is. Right. And it's amazing how through that process, people start to go, oh my gosh, I never thought about it this way. And wow, you're right. That has been affecting me all this time. And wow, I shouldn't think so much about that thing or give it so much importance, or wow, I'm not giving enough importance to this thing. And it's like, so part of our process is we discover that story with you, and then we help you tell it. And once you know how to tell your story, going back to that sort of cycle that I was mentioning earlier, now all of a sudden you've got a story that you know well, which is yours. And now that's the story you start to tell. And that's where you can start aligning your actions with your intentions. And it's...
Love that. Aligning your actions with intentions. So, Aaron, when someone like kind of comes to you and you work kind of through their purpose, finding their blind spots about the story, so comes to your team, is there any good question that maybe you wish they would ask you but never do?
I, 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 the first answer is no,
Okay.
because that would sort of suggest that there's a specific question that should be asked.
Okay.
The big thing that we encourage and we create the environment for it is, and it's a word that I use delicately, and that's vulnerability. Because at the end of the day, whether you're writing your own book or in our case, writing it for you, you need to be allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to really share what your life has truly been. And I always tell people, I say, look, at the end of the day, nothing goes to print without your approval. So let's take off those sort of boundaries and guards, let them down, and let's just give this experience what it needs to make it great. And we'll worry about the editing in the editing stage. And at the end of the day, it's amazing. People will tell you things that don't make it to a book, and it's part of the experience, but that's also part of the editing. So it's not so much that there's a question I wish people would ask, but we do set the ground for people to understand that there isn't really any boundaries as it pertains to
that,
where we can go with it.
You got to be raw when you're getting your story out there, bro.
You do, and it's amazing because I think in life, I mean, especially with social media, that makes us feel like everyone's got the best hair every day, the best looking meal, the best looking friends, the best looking, weather, everything's the best. We've got this sort of sense of, well, we can't be mediocre, and I think that that's unfortunate.
Right.
And it's the same with conversations. I mean, at the end of the day, we can talk about the weather and that's the end of that. Right. Or we can talk about things that matter, which I think is how people end up saying, I feel like I've known you forever. And it's because you're talking about something that has meaning. And those kind of conversations happen when you don't care about what the other person thinks about what you have to say or what they're going to judgment and that kind of thing. And, it's the same with music. If you can write a song that has that level of emotion in it, that people can insert themselves into that lyric or into that music, then you've got a hit on your hands. So it's the same kind of thing with a book.
And I love that you said about the comparisons and stuff. Because, I make a New Year's resolution, 2 of them every year. And I did it since 2009. And basically it's like, 1, make someone smile every single day, period. That's the first one. Second one is, unless I've hurt you, disrespected you, or anything bad to you in any way, I give 0 shits about what you think about me. Period. And that's where my story really started coming out from back then, once I didn't care so much what people thought of me, as long as I didn't hurt them in any way. There was people along the way that I did hurt, and I worked through apologies and discussions and stuff like that. So thank you for saying that about the comparisons. And so, Aaron, have you seen the movie Back to the Future?
Oh man, have I ever.
Awesome. So let's get in that DeLorean with Marty McFly. Let's go back to maybe the 20-year-old Aaron. Okay. What kind of knowledge nuggets would you drop on him? Not so much change anything, because your journey sounds pretty intense, but maybe to help him shorten his learning curve, maybe level up just a little bit quicker.
Well, I think there's a few things. So when I was 20, a week after I turned 19, I climbed the highest mountain in the world outside of Asia, which was one of the 7 summits. And that was a life-changing experience. And in retrospect, and I'm not saying this about myself, I'm just stating it as an experience. But the level of, requirements of mental toughness, physical toughness, really your body and mind are pushed to the max in those kind of situations. And I think that when it came to getting into business, I started my first company in my early 20s. And I was actually, now I think about it, I was suffering with pretty bad panic attacks when I was 20. And so I think it was this weird thing of this super tough mental person and, physically fit person coupled with, getting these panic attacks and then being sort of extremely driven, and wanting to make sure I was going to do business in music, or better said, make music my business. And yet I didn't have the confidence in myself to value myself and realize that you can have a million jobs, but just one life. And so when you give your time away, that you should really value that time. And so in my case, if I was to go back in the DeLorean, which would be just awesome in itself, I've got the music in my head now. I
Huey
would I
Lewis,
would
baby.
I would tell myself exactly what my dad told me a few years later, and that is that don't give up. What you're doing is incredibly valuable. You're not charging enough for it, but just don't give up and believe in yourself. Because my dad, and I'll give you a brief story. I talked about how musicians are told get a real job. It's a hobby when they get older.
Hmm.
And I was pursuing business and I was making trips to Nashville and I was going to LA and places like that. And it was a particular early trip to Nashville. And I'd managed to end up having beers and burgers with the president of Warner. And at the time, I was still not really making much in the way of money.
Hmm.
And so consequently, I had to take on quite a few jobs with different clients in order to make things work.
Hmm.
And I took that trip with my dad up to Nashville, and he said to me on the way back when he realized what I'd been doing there, he said, "Man, I could never have done that at your age. Walk into a room like that with those kind of people." He says, "You got to keep doing this. This is what you're meant to do, and this is something that you should never give up. And you're worth this. Like, you need to make sure that this is what you do." I got home from that trip and I went from charging people hundreds of bucks to the very first client was 4,000. The next client, this is in a period of 30 days, 12,000, and the next time $21,000, all for the
Yeah.
exact same service,
Yeah.
and no difference, just a difference in price, all because it was said to me. Of course, it came from my dad, and that was probably a important person to tell me at that time. But if I was in the DeLorean, I would tell that to myself at the age of 20.
I love it, dude. That's fantastic to know your value. That's awesome. So, and charge for your value too. I had the hard time with coaching when I first started coaching. Be like, oh, it's 150 an hour, and now it's 5 figures a month, and it's per client, and it's I was living I felt like an imposter syndrome in a sense, just because I didn't
Absolutely,
believe in
man.
my own value. But then as things moved along, thank you for saying that. Your dad's a wise man, brother. So, I mean, how do you want your dash remembered then? Your little line in between your incarnation date and your expiration date, man, your life date and your death date. Hopefully it's a long way down the line, but how
Yeah.
does Aaron want his dash remembered?
Well, I like the idea that people remember me as someone who has wanted to help others. To a detriment, I've put others before myself.
Mm.
And I think that, when we die, it can not take very long to be forgotten. And so I think the big thing is to make impacts that last. I mean, that's actually part of when we do a book, we'll tell people, it's a way of securing your legacy forward. But in my case, I'd like to think that I've helped people and I've helped hopefully, make a small positive impact on the planet that I've had an amazing experience on so far.
Yeah, you are. I mean, you're basically planting trees you're not going to really sit in the shade of. Just, you're getting it out there, you're building that legacy. And it is awesome with this discussion. So what are 3 things then that Aaron can't live without? Other than anything electronical?
Yeah. I appreciate that part. Well, I would have a very hard time if I wasn't able to play my instrument.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
that
bro.
would be difficult. I have become extremely engaged and practitioner of meditation, and ended up spending a bunch of my time living with monks. And I would be very lacking in my life experience if I didn't have meditation. And I have to say that I'm a dad, so it's probably the first thing I couldn't live without. It would be my kids. I mean, my family are first and foremost to me.
Fantastic. I have kind of looked at you a little bit on social, and it's just the snowshoeing pictures. That stuff just looks fun. I can do without the snow for me, myself.
Hey,
I'm
man.
from Michigan, though. So, I mean,
I
get
yeah.
it, but I live in Florida now, so I kind of left that behind. So then, Aaron, what is your definition of a life well lived, brother?
Well, I think that a life well lived is being present in every moment. And when you are present in every moment, you have the ability to see the beauty and experience the joy that we have of the experience of life. And if we're not in the present moment, we lose that. So I would say be here now.
Dude, that's awesome. Because, I mean, so many people have a foot in the past, a foot in the future, and they piss all over the present, man. You know what I'm saying? So I love that you said that. Time to shine today, podcast Varsity Squad. We're back, and Aaron, one day we're going to hook up and we're going to have a nice conversation and talk through these. But you got 5 seconds to answer them with no explanations this time around. All right.
All right.
All right. Let's level up. Aaron, what's the best leveling up advice you've ever received?
I'm going to give you 2. Be here now, and you have one life to live. You can have a million jobs, so make sure that when you spend time on something that it's really worth it.
Love it. Share that passion. Beautiful. Share one of your personal habits that contributes to your success.
I would say it's my morning routine that includes having a cold shower and meditation and being able to work through my journal and my planner so that I can create what I want to happen moving forward in the day.
Beautiful. So you see me, I'm kind of walking down the street. You know, like Fergie looks like he's in his doldrums. Outside of your book, Reality and the Positive Power Perspective, what book might you hand me?
Oh my goodness.
Quickly, let's go.
Yes.
Do you have a bazillion of them behind you?
I do. I've got a bazillion behind me. Which would I recommend? You know what? I read The Untethered Soul like recently. I was not going to read it because I was like, what's with the horse on the beach? I called it The Untethered Horse. Yeah. I read the thing. I'm like, man, that's a great book. Read that book. You'll feel good.
Most common used emoji when you text?
I would definitely say the smiley face.
Nice. Nicknames growing up?
No nicknames. Maybe Airhead, which isn't a great one, but
love it.
Double A Ron, you know.
Chess, checkers, or Monopoly?
Chess.
Awesome. Go-to ice cream flavor?
Chocolate.
Beautiful. There's a sandwich named the Bethune. What's on that sandwich?
Well, I lived in Spain for many years, and they have a sandwich that's called a tortilla de patatas, and that is basically potatoes and eggs inside of bread, believe it or not. It's
beautiful.
Amazing.
Beautiful. Favorite charity and or organization you like to give your time or money to?
I worked for quite a few years with the St. Cecilia Foundation that are giving to the arts in the Delta in Mississippi, and I think they're doing an amazing job.
Excellent. Last question, and I've been waiting to ask you this one. You can elaborate on this one there, but what is the best decade of music? 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s?
Well, I would probably pick the 70s, but they all have amazing things about them. They all have a defined sound that you can recognize. The 80s have definitely been making their way back into popular music these days. I started listening to, when I was about 5, all I wanted was Elvis Presley records, and I ended up getting to with a bunch of Elvis's guys. But I went from the 50s up to producing music with other people into the 2000s. So I would say every decade has something, but if I picked it of the ones you just gave me, I would say the 70s.
Beautiful. And how old are you, Aaron, if you don't mind saying?
I am 41 years old.
Wow. Dude, don't look near it. Yeah, we look good. I'm 50, you're 41. We kind of came up with the genre.
Well, if I can look like you look at 50, man, going on 50, I'm going to be doing well.
Thank you. Like the 80s for me, just because I graduated in 1990, right? It was kind of like my jam, and like so much happened within that, time frame, from the invasions from Ireland with U2 and, Duran Duran and, Men at Work and all that Big Hair, Don't Care, glam rock. It just, there's so much that happened in the 80s. But if I'm chilling, it's the 70s. I have, everything from Croce to the Eagles to, stuff like that. So.
You know what? The 80s was like the virtuosos came back. You've got Paganini and on the violin way back when, and then you got Eddie Van Halen in the 80s. And personally, like on a personal like guitar player note, like I got really into the sort of shredder music, Big Hair. I absolutely love that stuff. But I find that the biggest thing that has been valuable for me studying, the different decades of music is, people talk about musical notation as being this language for musicians to communicate with, and I agree.
Sure.
But when you're in the studio and you're producing some band, artist, whatever it might be, or you're recording your own music, it is so huge and so valuable to be able to say, think like The Edge, and maybe you think of a particular song and you go, okay, think like that, and let's try and bring that energy out. And if you've studied enough music, you know exactly that, what sort of strumming is happening, the sort of the effects that are being played. And so those kind of things, it becomes the real language. So for me, the 80s, it's all the synth, it's the drum sounds.
Yeah.
It's all these things that if you want something to sound like the 80s, I know what that is, right? And so that's the useful part, but it'd be hard, man. Like every era has amazing music.
Yeah, absolutely. You'd know more about it than I do. But with regards to like songs these days, they're coming out. You know how many hooks are from the 80s? It's crazy. Like Pitbull has Aha's Take on Me in one of his songs. Flo Rida has Round Round. I mean, everybody to me kind of steals from the 80s, They
have, and if you look at that, like, I mean, we started sampling music in the 80s and actually even slightly before that. But the point is that I'm seeing more than ever music references happening. I mean, people have said for a long time there is no new music, but what I'm seeing is, and this is a whole other conversation for another day, but when radio was taken away from local programming, you had the Detroit sound, and then Clear Channel comes along and basically programs from headquarters and decides what the entire country is going to listen to, and in that sense, I think there's a lot of music that is starting to. I mean, you can see it. There's all these songs that are overlaid, and you can see the same progression, the same thing. Yeah. And it's this weird thing about data. And you and I were talking a little bit about data before we got on this call. And the fact is that it feels like data is now indicating what makes a hit. And the weird thing about that, and this is the thing that blows my mind to some degree, is, okay, so if I look at the data of what makes a hit, and I decide I'm going to write a song with elements that the data proves to be a hit, then what I'm doing is I'm looking at the past to create what that hit was, but that hit was because it stood out, because it wasn't like what came before it. Right. So now we're going into the past to create what we think is going to be a hit next, when in reality, I think what we need to be doing is creating music that's not like we've already seen and heard, so that we have an era of music of our own, and that we can look at how that's going to influence people moving forward. Because, U2 definitely has been an influence on people like Coldplay and their sound, and that keeps going. But if we start looking back into the to the data, it's a bit of a weird way to get inspired, I find. But anyways,
absolutely,
don't get me started on
an artist. Yeah, we got to kind of cut it off there because we got to wrap it up a little bit. But I 100% agree with you. So how can we find you, Aaron?
www.aaronbethune.com or at www.wewritestories.com.
I love it. And squad it. I'm going to put everything into the show notes from Aaron. If you're looking to get your voice heard, looking to get known, and get that interesting story that even if you don't feel like it's interesting, I'd love to make a warm introduction to Aaron, who started at 4 years old, playing the piano. Instead of being Beethoven, he wanted to maybe move into the Randy Rhoads and start shredding his guitar. And he took his passion, and he made it into really wanting to be involved in helping people develop, because a lot of people will drift away from their passions towards the fiscalness, that's my word for the day, with their decisions. So Aaron can really help you ground, and his team can really help you find that story that's within you and really have positive comparisons that are out there. Not comparing yourself to others. Be authentic. Know where you're at. Understand your value. And understand that, his squad will help you and encourage you to provide a space for vulnerability also, because a lot of people, you have to be vulnerable really to get that story out. And his team, he wears kid gloves sometimes, maybe not sometimes, to really help you get that story out. You don't ever give up really on what your passions are. Aaron reminded us, understand that you have value. If you're in a business, charge what your value is, have that confidence in yourself. He's remembered somebody as someone that helped others. Again, he plants trees now that he won't sit in the shade of, and he's going to continue to collaborate and be creative and help you in that sense as well. He wants you to be present every moment, because it gives you the ability to see beauty and experience life as it's meant to be experienced. And Aaron, you level up your health, you level up your wealth, you're humble, yet you're hungry. And I'm so blessed that we are connected, and I can't wait to collaborate in the future, my friend.
Man, I appreciate you. And I have to say, those were some awesome notes.
Awesome, man. I
wish I could do that.
Love you guys, brother. I'll chat soon.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of Time to Shine Today podcast. Proudly brought to you by Sutter & Nugent Real Estate. Real Estate Excellence, who can be reached at 561-249-7266 and online at www.sutterandnugent.com. If you are a business owner or professional who would like to be interviewed on Time to Shine Today, please visit timetoshinetoday.com/guest. If you like this episode, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. There's a link in the show notes to our website. Also there, you will see our recommended resources. We hope that you will support our show by supporting them. If you like what you've been listening to, it'd be great if you could just give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe while you're at it. I'm your host, Scott Ferguson, and until next time, let's level up. It's our time to shine.